Hello, and welcome to a new entry of Myths for Megami Tensei, where I talk about folklore, stories, and gods from around the globe that I think would just be fun to see in a Megaten game one day. However, with this being the spooky month of October, I decided to try something a little different today. All 10 picks for today's video are ghosts, apparitions, or other types of spirits. So I guess this is more of a ghosts I'd love to see in SMT video. However, I am still following my one main rule, which is only one figure per branch of mythology, and you can argue I might be playing a little fast and loose with what counts as a ghost, but I at least tried to be consistent. Also, I've been watching a lot of the sitcom Ghosts, both the British and American versions, and I really like it, but that's neither here nor there. As always, if you like what I do here, please consider commenting, subscribing, maybe even checking out the Patreon. It helps a lot. Thanks a bunch. Now, let's get started, shall we? In the region of Wahiwa, on the island of Oahu, yes, it's another Hawaiian entry, there exists a story of a ghost known as the Green Lady. Much to my surprise, she doesn't seem to have a Hawaiian name. That's just how she's known, the Green Lady. That's how I was told about her anyway. This is a ghost story about a woman who haunts the Wahiwa Gulch. The stories vary a bit, but usually speak of her losing one of her children in the gulch or nearby woods, and haunting the area to this day, looking for them. She'll also kidnap any children who wander into her area, making it a cautionary tale for kids not to play in the woods, and especially not to play around the gulch. Again, that's what I was told. I want to be clear, I lived like 15 minutes away from where this ghost supposedly haunts as a kid. I went to Leilehua High School. This story literally came from my neck of the woods. The Green Lady is supposedly beautiful, but also has green skin, reptile-like features, and a body covered in leaves, moss, and other plants. Because of her scaly skin, some versions even hint that she might be a mo'o, shape-shifting lizard woman that I discussed in a previous episode. This is a well-known ghost story amongst kids in Oahu, and while unlikely to make it into the franchise, it's a story I like, and I'm always down for more Hawaiian myths in the franchise. Okay, I'm gonna promise now that not all the ghosts on this list are just gonna be vengeful women that kill people or steal children, but for the record, I could have very easily done that. I just wanted to pick this one because, hey, sometimes the most obvious ones are the best, and why not Bloody Mary? While the actual origins of who Mary is are slightly contested, ranging from Queen Mary I of England to the ghost of a woman named Mary who was burned during the witch trials, which just so happens to be a character in the UK version of Ghosts, regardless of who she actually is or was, Bloody Mary is a popular urban legend and ritual that people conduct either by themselves or at slumber parties or similar events. Like with many ghost stories, in fact, from here on out, just pretend I said this about every entry in this video, there are a few different versions. The game typically involves being alone in a bathroom at night or some other room with a mirror, lighting a candle, and slowly and clearly saying Bloody Mary 3 times while watching your own reflection. Sometimes you may need to spin around a few times, or in some versions you have to say it 13 times, but the principle is usually about the same. Supposedly, Bloody Mary will appear in the mirror as a woman covered in blood. She may show you your future spouse or a skull if you're destined to die before marriage. She may show you a happy future or grim misfortune, but no matter what you see, you must not break eye contact with the mirror, because that's all the time Bloody Mary needs to break through into our world where you're likely to be her first victim. Japan already has a few similar myths of their own, like Hanako-san and even the Purple Mirror, but I think Bloody Mary is a large enough figure to be worth considering. By the way, I tried this for myself once in college, and I can confirm that if you light a candle at midnight and scream Bloody Mary 3 times into a mirror, your roommate will yell at you to go the f*** to bed. Not every ghost is out to kidnap children or cause havoc and chaos. Some merely need help moving on from our world to the next, and they may not even be seen as scary or supernatural, but as a more organic part of the relationship between the living and the dead. In an ancient Egyptian ghost story literally pieced together from broken tablets that are roughly 3,000 years old, there exists a tale about a ghost named Nebusemekh. This ghost becomes restless when part of his tomb collapses, letting in the natural wind. He speaks with a high priest, Khonsu Emeb, who tries to help the ghost find peace and pick out a new spot to rebuild his tomb. Because the tablet the story was recorded upon was broken, we actually don't know for certain how the story begins or ends. While many historians seem to assume that Khonsu-Emeb was successful in helping Nebusemekh rest peacefully, we don't know for certain. And I'll just say, I love the idea of an ancient Egyptian ghost demon actually made up of broken fragments with pieces missing. It'd be a really cool visual, and this is a tale that I think stands out a lot from some of the more traditional ghost stories. A common belief is that true horror is about taking what's safe and comfortable and turning it against you. I don't think it's a coincidence that such a popular trend in indie horror games is about taking concepts we knew and loved as children and trying to make them unsettling. So I will give full credit to Malaysia for turning one of my biggest loves against me with the Hantu Tetek. This ghost uses her boo to... oh, no, wait, sorry, that's a typo. Ghost using boo isn't special, it's like the whole thing. The Hantu Tetek uses her boobs to capture, squeeze, and suffocate those she gets her hands on. Yes, this is a large-breasted woman who finds those walking alone at night, shoves their faces between her giant ghostly gazumazooms, and will only release you after you've drawn your final breath. And look, I don't want to give y'all too much ammunition to use against me, but I'm just gonna say, like, there are worse ways to go, right? Like, admittedly, most versions of the story aim to try and make it seem less fun than it sounds by implying stuff like she's actually a super old ugly hag with her big boobs hanging down and flopping past her knees or something, or that her boobs are coming out of her back, or that she's got 3 boobs at... Anyway, alls I'm saying is, I've seen some of the female demons that Doi's given us, and if he knew there was a large-breasted ghost woman with a penchant for suffocation, I think we'd be in for a good time. Fried egg boobs or otherwise. Speaking of eggs, yes, that's my segue, deal with it, the Dalgyal Gwishin, or Korean egg ghost, is a type of specter or spirit that may appear as a man or woman, young or old, basically just about anybody. They're not said to be one specific figure, essentially. They're described to be mostly normal-looking human beings, with the most notable exception being pale white featureless faces, so no eyes, nose, mouth, ears, anything. Some versions may also lack arms and legs, further solidifying their egginess, and supposedly some can actually transform into an egg and use that form to roll around and get places without being detected. Some of you might be familiar with the Nopperabo, which is a similarly faceless ghost or yokai from Japanese folklore, but while that spirit is generally harmless, except for maybe wanting to give you a fright now and then, the Dalgyal Gwishin are incredibly dangerous and will actively kill anybody they come across who looks directly at their lack of a face. The common belief behind people becoming an egg ghost is if somebody dies when they have no living relatives to hold a memorial service for them. It's just a good, creepy ghost story, and I do notice Megaten doesn't have much from Korean folklore, so this could be a unique addition with a lot of wiggle room for creating a memorable design. Japan has so many good ghost stories, and I struggled to pick just one. Next year, I could do an entire video on 10 Japanese ghost stories I'd love to see in SMT. While some are already in the franchise, like the Turbo Granny or Reiko Kashima, there are plenty that aren't. I actually really wanted to talk about Otsuyu, but again, I wanted to have a bit more variety than spurned or heartbroken woman ghosts. In fact, the figure I chose from Japan today isn't even human. The Bake-Kujira, which roughly translates as ghost whale, is a yokai from Japanese folklore that haunts the seas. These large skeletal whales seek out and curse those who would harm whales or eat their meat. It's believed that sailors who encounter a Bake-Kujira will experience misfortune, such as plagues, wildfires, or merely becoming forever lost at sea. While most depictions of the spirit are simply a whale skeleton, sometimes with a glowing spiritual body around it, part of me would love to see the Megaten version of this figure with more of a Zilla from Monster Rancher, Satitan from Pokemon, land whale sort of design. Either way, come on, ghost whale. This next one is less of a specific figure and more of a category, and it might actually be considered blasphemous to classify them as ghosts, but I'm gonna. Cephalophore is a Greek term for a common trope throughout Christianity of beheaded spirits who carry around their own heads. Their spirit living on this way, or being able to hold their own head in their hands, usually with their head or neck stump being depicted with a radiant glowing halo around it, signifies that their death transformed them into a holy martyr who died for their cause. There are many famous examples of cephalophores, like Denis of Paris, Valerie of Limoges, Bertrand de Born from Dante's Inferno, and even Saint Bartholomew, who introduced Christianity to Mongolia.
It didn't take, but it was worth a try.
Hilariously enough, despite John the Baptist being the most famous beheaded saint, he doesn't get to be a cephalophore, because he never actually carried around his own head. He just died. Like a chump. You know what this list has been lacking? Children. Like, ghost kids are always extra creepy. Whether you're those twins from The Shining, or even Alice from Megami Tensei, nobody wants to deal with creepy dead kids. Well, the Myling from Scandinavian folklore are that. These are the spirits of unbaptized children who were murdered and abandoned by their mothers. They haunt the areas around their graves and attempt to scare those who walk by with rustling leaves, singing songs, or just creepy laughter. Those who wander too close to where the Myling is buried may find themselves at the mercy of their requests. Basically, a Myling may ask you for one of two things to help them move on to the afterlife. The first is that they may just want a name, either because they were killed before getting one, or they died too young to remember theirs. When in doubt, I don't know, Steve? Steve is a good name. The other, much more difficult request is that the Myling will jump onto your shoulders and demand that you carry them to the nearest cemetery so that you can give them a proper burial. And from here, you have two options. You can say no, and then the Myling will kill you, or you can agree and start hoofing it. Unfortunately, the longer the Myling remains on your back, the heavier it becomes, with it eventually becoming so heavy that your body will sink into the soil. And if you can't get to the cemetery in time, yeah, it kills you. Not cool, Steve. Something that I always find incredibly fascinating is when multiple countries and cultures all seem to have their own takes on what is, at its core, the same general idea. I could simply say the Lady in White or White Lady and be referring to any number of ghostly figures from the UK, Thailand, multiple states, the Philippines, Estonia, and the country I'm going with for this pick, Brazil, where we have the Mulher De Branco. Most of these stories have something in common, with it being the ghost of a pale woman, usually on the younger side, wearing a long white dress or nightgown. Many of these stories tell tales of heartbreak and often stem from betrayal from a husband, lover, or even father. In many cultures, the Lady in White appears at night in front of blood relatives and serves as a harbinger of their imminent death. The Mulher De Branco specifically is supposedly silent, but may tell her tale of heartbreak and betrayal to those she trusts. One story I found from this myth is that the Mulher De Branco's father forced her to marry a man she did not love. That man, believing his new wife to be unfaithful to him with a servant, cooked the servant into a stew and forced her to eat it. And yes, I'm aware that this isn't the first time cannibal stew has come up in one of the myths I've talked about on this show. One thing I read while trying to learn more about this figure is that it's basically the Brazilian version of La Llorona, but I'm not entirely sure how accurate that is to say, and I do hope one of my awesome viewers from Brazil can provide a bit more information in the comments. And finally, my little reward for those of you that are still here is that we're talking about Jeff. No, not the killer from all the old creepypastas. This is something far more entertaining and ridiculous. This is the story of Jeff, the Talking Mongoose. This tale begins in the 1930s when the Irving family began to notice a peculiar haunting at their farmhouse on the Isle of Man, an island off the coast of Ireland. The spirit originally made normal scratching sounds, but would eventually start to mimic animals and even talk. Jeff claimed that he was the spirit of an extra clever mongoose, and that he'd traveled over 4,000 miles from Delhi just to die and haunt here. The Irvings tried to make the best of living with Jeff, even offering him food and playing music for him, but he ended up being unruly, supposedly throwing stones at the inhabitants and screaming throughout the nights, especially once the Irvings tried to use their haunting for fame and attention, with there even being books about this mongoose. Ultimately, Jeff was believed to be nothing more than a hoax perpetrated by the family, but what if he wasn't? What if to this day, on the Isle of Man, there rests the petulant spirit of an extra clever mongoose? And who wouldn't want to see that in a Megami Tensei game? Poltergeist Mongoose. Alright, and there you have it, 10 ghost stories that I have a fondness for, or at the very least I think could make for some very interesting additions to the Megami Tensei franchise. What do you all think? Do any of the stories I told today sound good to you? Are there any particular ghost stories that you think would make for fantastic demons? Let me know in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching. I want to wish you all a happy Halloween, and hope that you have a wonderful holiday, free of any particularly bad ghostly encounters. Now if you'll all excuse me, I've got a vacation in Malaysia to plan.